Hello, welcome to the Risks Exposed. What is COVID-19 telling us about the way we plan and build our living environments? I'm Simon Wicks, the Deputy Editor of the Planner magazine, and your guide for the next 30 minutes. It will, I hope, be a half hour in which we sharpen your appetite for the rest of the Planner Live online, the RTPI and the Planner's alternative convention for 2020. Ahead of us lies a week's worth of webinars, interviews and debates that consider how the COVID-19 pandemic is affecting the way we live and what that may mean for planning now and in the future. But we're kicking off this week by taking a look at what it is we're actually talking about. What is COVID-19 telling us about how we live, for better and worse? How we design our homes, our streets, and our neighbourhoods? What does it tell us about our relationship between the living environments we create and human health and well-being, socially, physically, mentally? With me to explore why we're talking about planning during a public health emergency are two women who bring very different perspectives to these questions. Araceli Camargo is a cognitive neuroscientist and co-founder of Centric Lab, a research organization with a mission to use data to improve health in cities. She and her colleagues employ the tools of neuroscience to help us understand what effects our environment have on our mental and physical health. Welcome, Araceli. Riette Oosthuizen is an urban planner. More specifically, she's a partner and head of planning for the interdisciplinary design practice HTA Design, which specializes in housing and places an emphasis on quality and increasingly well-being. Welcome, Riette. Both Araceli and Riette are going to give a short presentation. We're going to spend a few minutes digging into the issues a little more deeply before taking a couple of questions from you, the audience. I've got two quick notes before we get going. If you're a tweeter, please do comment using the hashtag PlannerLiveOnline. And I'm told also that if you take a look at the handout section on your control panel, you can find links to RTPI work related to this session in the downloadable PDF. If you're watching this session as a recording, the links will be available on the RTPI website at rtpi.org.uk/plannerlive. And finally, we'll have time for a couple of questions at the end. So if there's anything you'd like to ask, just type it into the questions box, which you'll see on your screen, and I'll pick one or two to ask our guests. But you're up first, Araceli. The screen is all yours.
Great, thank you, Simon. So I'm going to do an unorthodox presentation. I'm just going to ask you a whole bunch of questions to the audience. So through these questions, we're going to get to a destination. So the first place that we're going to start is with a statement that the built environment is directly responsible for structural racism and therefore has a responsibility to take action. So whilst brands like Nike or Patagonia can put their black square and state their allegiance to Black Lives Matter, which is great, they don't directly affect people's health the way that the built environment does. So I'm going to ask you to meditate over these series of questions. So there's about 10 or 11. So here we go. Who gets access to clean air? Whose kids walk to school safely away from air pollution and traffic? Who gets better infrastructure, i.e. sidewalks, crossings, lights? Who lives in a good quality housing? That means low crowding, outside space, low levels of noise. Who gets a good quality sleep? Who feels safe on public transport? Who gets to access safe, reliable public transport? Who feels safe going for a walk, running, cycling, and or engaging with the public realm? And who has the time affordance to be able to do so? Who lives in a high flooded area? Who lives in an area with high urban heat index? So those are areas that have disproportionate higher level temperatures when there's a heat wave. Who sees or has access, to good quality sources? So housing, schools, healthcare, post office, banks. Who has access to communal spaces, shared spaces, so there is an affordance to create community? Who has access or feels safe to access green spaces? The people who are able, the people who are less able to do this are the people that have higher levels of poor quality health outcomes. So when you are living in this type of life where you're not given any of these affordances, when it's not your child going to school in an area that has low levels of air pollution, when you are not the one who can access safe and reliable transport, when you're not the one who can get quality sleep, you're going to have poor health outcomes. That is structural racism. That is what we have to try to fix in the built environment, because the who experience this the most are people of color, poor people, and poor white people, especially in this country. So here we're looking at both classism and racism. And that is how we get to the poor health outcomes that we've seen with COVID-19. It's not that being BAME, being Black, being Bangladeshi directly has anything to do with getting sick. It's not a question of genetics. That is not actually how genetics works. So what is causing it is the environment that people are living in, the environment that people are forced to live in because of zoning, because of the environments, because of the tolerances that we create, that we think, well, maybe we should give the money here and not here, or we should make improvements here and not here. So that's what I want you guys to think about. How do we begin to dismantle this? How do we begin to prioritize the people with poor health outcomes? And if you want more detail of what this is and how this phenomenon works, we have an open source study on our website, one that covers the experience of the people in South Hall, and one that covers directly COVID and BAME communities and describes exactly and breaks down scientifically the phenomena that I just described. And that's it for me.
Thanks, Araceli. Okay, that was tantalizing. You've touched on a lot of issues there. I think there's an awful lot to unpack. Chiefly, you seem to be saying that location, what planners tend to like to call place, concentrates social and health inequalities. Through the course of your research, I mean, is this something that's just been coming to the fore insistently? And how are you sort of getting to this information? What's the process by which you get these results?
No, sadly, this isn't new. The first study that looked at health in terms of place was a study done in Chicago in 1939, where it looked at place and schizophrenia. So we're talking well over 100 years we have known this. And that's a point that is also worth mentioning. We don't need any more data and research to understand that a poorly planned environment affects people's health. We now need the data and the resources to figure out how we elevate health and how we elevate these environments and clean them up. We do this using various different tools. So our main tool is something that we call the SRS, which is the street risk score. So we can look at an area based on its environmental stressors. So that's air, noise, light, and heat pollution. But then we also layer it with IMD data to look at something called biological inequality. So people that experience higher levels of biological inequality, that is that they experience stress chronically at a disproportionate level. That is the crux to disease pathway. Once you have that, your entire biological system begins to deregulate. So your immune system doesn't work as well. Your metabolic system doesn't work as well. And once you have those deregulations, that is when you are more susceptible to disease, which is why these people in these areas then end up having things like diabetes and obesity, which were one of the two cofactors or main cofactors to COVID-19. But again, even at that level of when we're talking at the comorbidity level, the reason we're seeing that disproportion has nothing to do with, I don't know, the dumb things that have been said about vitamin D, or because, you know, I've also heard, oh, we maybe need to bring in the sugar tax more to lower obesity. You can't, that's not how we tackle these problems, because you can't tell a person go and do exercise when you haven't given them that affordance. And you can't tell people eat a better diet when you haven't given them the affordance to economic equity. So those are the things that's why I want people to understand health systemically, and that it's not, it can only be the person's agency once we give them that agency.
So we need to deal with the structural issue to begin with.
100%.
Let's come back to that. after we've heard from Riette, because I know that this is something that you can both talk about with equal facility. Riette, let's take a look at the effect. I mean, we've heard a bit about the environment and the impact of the environment on health and well-being. Let's take a look at the effect that the design of our homes might be having on our experience of the COVID virus. So, Riette, take it away.
I think you need to move on to my slide, Simon. Ah, there you go. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to join this discussion today. Now, current circumstances offer a really good opportunity to review how we design places where people live, but we should be wary of knee-jerk reactions. Social distancing can't become the norm for housing development, and I believe density isn't necessarily bad unless it's badly executed. The profile of housing delivery and design quality have hugely increased in importance over the last few years. And maybe even scarily now, we have the Cabinet Office driving many of the changes forthcoming. There's now much focus on design quality and the importance of design guidance. However, we should go beyond the basics of appearance. When thinking about design quality, the experience of a home is incredibly important. And it's notable that the recently established Quality of Life Foundation is looking to develop a new standard framework for those involved in the design and delivery of homes in the built environment. The problem is there's many assessment frameworks out there, and none of these look at standard issues. Now, people's experiences are key, and we need to ensure that we do not purvey some of the inequalities already present before we build, and Araceli has referred to some of these. We know about some of the disproportionate impact on BAME communities, but recent research by the Quality of Life Foundation and Portland Communications have also demonstrated that young people and renters are disproportionately affected. Before we go on to some of what we need to think about, what need to change in terms of housing design, I believe there might be certain non-negotiable elements if we look at the future. Location is incredibly important, and some of what Araceli referred to clearly demonstrates that for new housing development. We need to look at sustainable densities, and some of the Place Alliance's national housing audit earlier this year demonstrated that that is at least 50 dwellings per hectare. We need to think about contextual positive impact, and that doesn't mean that context always have to change. There is quite a lot in our existing urban framework that could change, and we should think about how best to do so. And then addressing climate change in design should be absolutely non-negotiable. If you can move on to the next slide, Simon, please. So the COVID-19 situation massively shines a spotlight on functionality of space in housing design. So we know that natural light, good air quality, comfortable temperatures, and storage are very important for well-being in housing. However, space standards require more attention. In London, the minimum space standard has become the maximum. Yet RIBA research in 2011 have demonstrated that homes in London are about 8% bigger than the rest of the country. So internal space dimensions, in particular house builder-led projects, have become hugely efficient. They do not necessarily allow for home working or the need of different members of household to have private space. And this is more acute in affordable housing because these homes tend to be occupied to the maximum. Renters, particularly those in the private rented sector, also have little choice and tend to occupy spaces very intensively. So there is implicit inequality in the impact of internal space dimensions of homes, particularly on those with little choice. Outside of London, it's up to local authorities to describe or ascribe to the nationally prescribed space standard, yet not many do, as such space is even more constrained in the majority of new homes. The private rented sector, I believe, is really problematic here, in particular for those with little choice, and even more so if these homes are brought about by permitted development rights, where there are few controls about internal space dimensions and amenity space standards. The multi-family build-to-rent sector is possibly different. This sector does it really well, as it is extremely well managed with communal facilities and excellent public realm. However, this is a very specific product. The next slide, please. So access to green space is really critical, private and communal space. Outside of London, there is no guarantee that there are set requirements. As again, a requirement for green space doesn't necessarily form part of the nationally prescribed space standard. But we need to look at more detailed design considerations, such as equitability of access to green space, suitability for different age groups, places to rest, places for fun, places for contemplation, and places for quietness. We also need to know that we need to design to see and be seen, to tackle isolation, ensure that green space is designed for all age groups. The next slide, please. The relationship with street is very important. We need to design with streets and street life in mind. Streets can foster community spirit. They can encourage people to say hello. They can act as additional amenity spaces for people when traffic is quiet. Clearly demonstrated during COVID-19 in my street, they can encourage community life and local identity. Too often the streets become the domain of the traffic engineer in new development, and they become soulless tarmac spaces. I think I want to end just by saying that there's a need to recognize that as professionals, we have the ability to add social value in ensuring good design. I think in the coming years, the local is going to become much more important. And we as planners have the ability to champion these themes, but we need to have the right tools in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Riette. It seems to me that you've both identified issues around affordability and inequality in particular as things that have exacerbated the degree of intensity with which COVID-19 has hit certain communities. So we've got a very clear issue here about inequality. I suppose the next question really, which is for both of you, but let's start with you, Riette. What can the planning system do about this? What tools are available to planners to remedy some of these issues that we've identified?
Well, at the moment, there aren't many tools actually to ensure. I think we understand a lot more about the themes necessary to be addressed. And I think Araceli has pointed out that we don't need more research. We know what the issues are. It's about the ability for planners to insist on certain outcomes. A lot of the tools that's being used, for example, a health impact assessment, if you do a major development proposal, is very much a tick box exercise, and it doesn't measure long-term impact. It doesn't talk to people. Similarly, so the use of post-occupancy evaluation, something that the RIBA is encouraging architects to use more as a practice, as a standard practice. I think that is incredibly important. It would look at building efficiency, but the social dimension needs to be built in. And currently, it doesn't form part of a planning requirement as part of the planning system to actually go and revisit building and places and learn lessons from it.
Okay, Araceli, I mean, in a previous conversation we've had, you talked about bringing together people from different disciplines, as if to say this is something that planning alone cannot deal with. Your view appears to be that solving the sort of multiple problems that we've identified is not something that can be accomplished by any one group of people. Could you just elaborate on that and tell us who you feel needs to be brought in to help to resolve this?
Yeah, so before I answer the question, so in regards to tools, I mean, this is what Centric is doing. We're building the tools for the solutions rather than just pointing out the problem. So we've got an open access now, it's on our website, an urban health index. So you can understand both as a civilian and as a professional, whether you live or work in an area that has high levels of biological inequality or is qualified as an area of poor health. And we also have a health resilience framework now as well, which allows, it's for councils to be able to now understand what are the nodes that need to be looked at in order to achieve better health outcomes. And in order to be able to do that, even Centric has partnered up, and we've created a cohort called Nexus Resilience. So this is Nexus Planning plus us and people that are also working in resilience. So Resilience Brokers is also part of it, and Oliver Heath, who is doing biophilia, but we're in talks of bringing also ecologists into the conversations, because what I see is that, quite frankly, there is a lack of maturity in the planning industry and in the built environment industry as a whole. People want to solve problems that we don't have, and the problems that we do have hardly get any mention, right? Like we're wanting to create drones for deliveries, but we can't provide somebody with a good quality road that they can drive on, so we can have lower air pollution. So I want ecologists to come into the conversation, because they have an acute understanding of how we can use greenery and biodiversity to make us climate adaptive. So this goes beyond we need parks and we need a couple trees. This is, we need to understand the indigenous vegetation of a place, so we can bring urban heat island down, so we can have vegetation that helps us combat things like flooding and also things like wind. So I will stop after this example. So in Houston, there was a really interesting study, and very poignant study, I should say, of how the combination of urban heat island, because it was so overly urbanized, so a lot of concrete, and the amount of skyscrapers that were allowed to go because everyone wanted the boom, in an area that is prone to hurricanes. What ended up happening is that the scientists described the skyscrapers as bringing in and hauling in the hurricane, and because of the heat and humidity just creates more precipitation. So it then changed the consistency of the hurricane itself to make it wetter. So then it hovered for longer and it was wetter. And of course, then there's no place for the water to go. So it created devastating amounts of flooding. And that's the kind of grown-up stuff that I think we have to start solving, and bringing in the more higher level expertise of scientists across the board, and people with real technical skill to help us solve these really emergency problems.
So, I mean, that's quite interesting that you've sort of almost started making a link there between COVID and the conditions in which people live and climate change. I mean, effectively, that's a kind of microclimate change that you've described, but there's a bigger issue around climate. Well,
look at what happened in Wales. No one's talking about what's happened in Wales. Wales went from 3 weeks of flooding, which caused massive devastation. So you're talking about shelter in place. Shelter in what place? They didn't have homes. And of course, Wales has been vastly hit by COVID as well. So they went from flooding and climate change directly to this pandemic.
So, okay, and we've got an issue of priorities as well. Now, we've only got a couple more minutes. I'm going to ask one more question myself. Then we've got one question waiting from the audience, which I think is a good one. Let's just think very quickly, Riette, if we can do this quickly, about density. You mentioned that, I mean, density has been blamed as something it's something that's been blamed for the spread of COVID in some quarters. But you say that density itself is not the problem. It's more about how it's done. Can you just sort of give us a quick elaboration on that, please?
I think we should just become, just like Araceli made a point about, we need to become grown up about the environmental factors. I think we should become more sophisticated about density, essentially. I mean, a lot of people just perceive density as bad, but it's about the detail that goes behind that. And of course, I'm not here arguing for hugely dense developments, but I think a lot of our current urban framework can become more intensified and well done. So, but we need to make sure there are links with social infrastructure. We need to make sure that we design right. We need to make sure that we design for enough air, for enough light, for access to green space. So I don't think we should all suddenly start living in suburbia or endless garden villages, for example. I think I think
Well,
because
Mr.
that's not necessarily the answer, but I think it's just a need for more sophistication and actually the use of internal space. What is important about that? How can that be multifunctional?
Okay, right. Thank you. We've got a question from the audience, and actually it aligns very nicely with where we were going anyway. The question is, should there be a new statutory purpose for planning to achieve health, well-being and community? So really this is about the priorities of planning and the priorities that sit behind the built environments we create. In your view, Araceli, do you feel that planning should be given this sort of reorientation, this sort of statutory drive towards health, basically?
100%. I mean, I think COVID, hopefully, my God, hopefully has taught us that the only ROI that is important is health. Like, we don't have anything without health. We've seen it. We don't even have economy without health. So yeah, health has to be the focus, has to be the ROI, has to be the intention, has to be the purpose. That is what we have to aim for, including planetary health, because we don't have human health without planetary health. So our cities need to become biosensitive, i.e. we need to design alongside nature, not with it, i.e. we just bring in a couple trees and we create a couple of fountains and that's our green and blue infrastructure. We need to be able to tackle both simultaneously.
Thank you. Riette, what about you? How do you feel about that?
I 100% agree with that as well. I mean, it's already part of this UN Sustainable Development Objectives, actually something that doesn't become very embedded in our general day-to-day understanding of what our role is as planners. Actually, the RIBA have a Sustainable Development Outcomes Guide linking a lot of these objectives together, which is a very useful template to have a look at. But I think, as Araceli said, I mean, we need to, as planners, actually have more conversations with ecologists, with the other experts, and actually understand that something like traffic engineers should be very much a part of this very wide discussions. Health professionals should all be part of that at the table discussions on major design projects, and they aren't at the moment. So I very much agree that that is essential.
Thank you. We are running out of time. I hope that this has been a bit of a taster. We've covered a lot of the areas that are going to be covered in more detail over the course of the week. So for instance, you know, tomorrow there's a session at 11 a.m. about green transport. We've got one on health and well-being later in the week. I'm pretty sure that we'll be addressing the issue of inequality and social and environmental and economic inequality within our built environments as well. Unfortunately, sadly, we couldn't spend more time with our guests this morning, both of whom are absolutely fascinating, I can tell you from experience, and have so much to say. So thank you very much for listening. I've got a couple more bits of housework to take care of before we wrap up completely. Please do tell us what you think about this session and about Planner Live Online generally on Twitter using the hashtag Planner Live Online. I believe there's also a survey that will come up on your screen at the end of this session, which we urge you to complete, please. Make sure also that you're subscribed to the RTPI's YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/the RTPI, easy to remember. That's so you're notified of newly released videos as part of Planner Live Online and recordings of any sessions you may have missed. If you want to know what else is going on this week, and there's an awful lot, take a look at the schedule. That's at rtpi.org.uk/plannerlive. Next up, I believe it's this afternoon at 2 p.m. on the RTPI's YouTube channel. You can see the RTPI President, Victoria Hills, in conversation with Sarah Richards, the Chief Executive of the Planning Inspectorate. Tomorrow, as I said, at 11 a.m., the COVID recovery theme kicks off in earnest with Transport for a Green Recovery, which I hope will pick up on some of the things we've talked about today. Thank you very much for watching, and please do give our guests, Araceli and Riette, a virtual round of applause for their presentations and insights, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.